So, today's talk is about going deeper. So many of us come to Dharma because we want peace, we want to be happy, and the world is just really overwhelming and confusing and full of conflict and polarities, and it's exhausting for many of us, and not at all perhaps the world we imagined growing up of how the world would be. And as when you get your first job and just realize, the world is probably a bit of a disappointing place, and, the economy and capitalism can be soul crushing if you're a sensitive person who, wants to contribute something meaningful to the world, and you realize like the world is just so much bigger than me, and I don't really know how I can keep my light alive in this big place, So then we probably take up something like Dharma or meditation to feel happy and to cope with the stress, to just need some peace and some refuge, to a little bit of happiness, a little bit of sanctuary. And that is a bit like a bewildered animal crawling into its hole deep in the earth to recover and be nourished and take refuge in that soft place in a heart, a soft place to fall in a hard world. And we think that we leave behind the suffering of the world at the monastery gate, and that we've come to a safe place and things will be better inside the monastery or inside the meditation. And for a while they are, there's that peace, there's that joy that comes from having a concentrated mind, from being around people that are non-violent, making an effort to cultivate clarity. It can be really wonderful after being in the world, and it feels quite different to the world, But after a while, our old issues come up, or we feel happy and then we kind of lose our sense of urgency about practice. We get distracted by other things because the original ill-being that drove us to seek peace is sublimated somewhat because we have some peace. And then we gradually, we forget our practice because we feel good, and, so we disappear from the scene. And then we go back into the world and all of those old problems come back and we get overwhelmed again. And then we probably come back. And so that cycle goes on. We have that kind of, it's a bit like exercise, or anything so-called virtuous. We go through phases, like we go through a phase where we're exercising or we're gardening or we're doing something that we consider positive. And then we fall off the wagon and, go back to watching crappy TV and eating junk food for a while. Or the metaphor of whatever that is for us. And, but, our practice has to be deeper than just seeking happiness, not that there's anything wrong with being happy. Being happy is a crucial condition, and well-being is a crucial condition. Joy is a crucial condition for staying on the path of awakening and just for functioning in life. It's very hard to practice with no joy and no sense of humor, no lightness. It's hard to live life in general. But our practice has to go a little bit deeper than just peace. Peace is only the prologue for a really good book. And if you've read the prologue, you haven't really read the book, right? Imagine if you looked at The Lord of the Rings and just read the prologue, So our practice has to be deeper because our life is deeper. And our practice has to embrace suffering and allow us to feel what we feel, to unpack our trauma, to unpack and integrate daily life. and the challenges, the messiness, confronting our own fucked upness, our own inner mess, you can say. Because without that, our practice won't stay the course of our life. And it won't be a refuge in hard times. It's like a marriage, right? A marriage is not, or a really good relationship is not the first few dates. A relationship is the good and the bad, and really the intimacy that comes when you're there and that person is seeing parts of you you don't really want them to see, but it's who you are. And if they can't really see you in that, you're not really together. You don't have real intimacy. So likewise, your practice is your partner in life, and your practice is going to see and reveal to you things about yourself you didn't always want to see. But it's necessary, because as long as you're being driven by unconscious things, things that you don't necessarily want to hijack your life will, like sometimes we're attracted to people for reasons we can't really understand. And sometimes it's because they represent part of our unresolved trauma. And we either have maybe too much empathy for them because we see our wounded child in them, or maybe we see demons, we feel aversion to them because they represent something unresolved in ourselves. And we unfairly transfer our emotional burden onto them. We feel immediately challenged and adversarial towards them. And sometimes, we don't even know them enough to hate them, but they seem to press all our buttons because they represent something unresolved in ourselves. And only by becoming aware of these things can we stop our life being hijacked by things we don't want to be driving our life. So to have something unconscious, to be unconscious about your trauma and your unresolved issues, is to be vulnerable to hijacking, in the sense of sometimes we're like, how did that happen? How did I end up like this? In another really bad relationship, or whatever, off a really bad track. We've just lost the track of our life because unconscious, right? What is unconscious will drive us until it's resolved, until we shed some light on it. And only when we shed light on it can it be embodied and transformed. So yeah, just this idea that we demonize anger or, lust or difficult emotions and just cut them out like some kind of surgical operation is not the real process of the spiritual path. The real process of the spiritual path is much more messy, much more slow, much more hard work, but kind of worth it in the end, because those things no longer drive you. They become your allies. They can pull your chariot to awakening. And all that energy that was tied up in, rage or projection or lust or whatever, or aversion, can be reintegrated as wholesome energy. And also gives us empathy for others, you can only really hold space for others to the extent that you can hold space for your own mess. Yeah. And there's this idea that the spiritual path should be like a suburban Connecticut, matchbox suburb. Everything's nice. Everybody mows their lawns. Everybody's respectable. When really it's more like, a kind of outer city, semi-slum ghetto area where people have all kinds of issues and walk around on drugs, and nobody's mown their lawn for a few months, and the children run feral in the streets and the dogs howl. Yeah. So, but, you know, to be happy, we must address suffering and we must feel it. And we have to show and honor that it's an act of compassion for yourself to honor what is real in you and what needs attention. And no one can do that work for you. We can wait for others to treat us as we feel we deserve to be treated, to love us as we feel we deserve to be loved. But we can be waiting a really long time for that. And until we can do that for ourselves, you know, it's so frustrating. We're taught as children, you know, the fairy tale, wait for the one who'll make everything okay, and, you know, kind of wait for the world to save you, you know, or you're going to be the hero who will vanquish the enemy, but the enemy is you. The enemy is your own shadow. Doesn't need to be vanquished, needs to be embraced. There's this wonderful book called A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin, who is a wonderful fiction author. And in this story, the hero, out of ego, he's a wizard, out of ego, he tries to bring someone back from the dead, and he brings back a demon. And the demon then pursues him. And at times he pursues the demon, and he's just so afraid, and, you know, experiences this bleak loneliness and fear, and, you know, it's like destroying his whole life, this demon pursuing him. And in the end, he pursues the demon, and in the end, he can only overcome the demon by knowing its own name. And in the end, he comes to face the demon, you know, who's made his life so hard and you know, bleak, and he says the name of the demon and the demon's name is his own name, because the Mara in the archetypal, the demon of ignorance that pursued the Buddha on the night of his enlightenment, was his own ignorance, you know. And the demon makes all kinds of promises. Look at this land. Why do you need to get enlightened? You know, we can rule this land together. We'll share it, you and me, okay? See these beautiful women. Wouldn't you like them? And in the story of a female saint, on her enlightenment, there was some, you know, hot dudes who rolled up and they were like, yeah, you know, come on. So whether you're a male or female, it doesn't matter. Whatever is seductive, whatever is distracting, whatever will, have you noticed how much resistance comes up when you sit down to meditate? You're like, I really need to vacuum. I really must do my yearly financial income, you know, all the things we put aside, like, you know, I really must change the oil, then I can meditate. But it's that kind of fear in ourself of death, the fear that, you know, of what we might unlock, the kind of, we both want to and don't want to open Pandora's box. But the price of not doing so means the demon is in the driver's seat, you know. And traditionally, like, you know, the story of a jinn who is a genie, so-called, we call it, locked in a bottle for 5,000 years, and we open the bottle and the jinn comes out and says, what do you want? You know, what's your wish? But ultimately, we're the one who has to grant the jinn's wish. You know, what you're on the loose. What do you want? To just give me some peace? You know, what do you need, basically? And it's really not that different to a crying baby. You know, a baby needs to be fed, needs to be comforted, needs to be burped, needs to sleep, needs to have its nappy changed. And it's just this intuitive process of understanding, what do you need? So we have all these crying babies, you know, and what we need to do is identify, okay, my little demon, what do you need? You know, and eventually it stops from being a red-faced, angry, crying baby who can sometimes feel like a demon, like it won't let you sleep and you haven't slept in 2 days. And it'll drive you to the edge of sanity, you know. But finally it's like, what do you need? You know, and just sit with it, crying your own heart, crying, what do you need? You know, and sometimes I just need to be seen. I need to be felt. I need to be acknowledged. I need to be no longer shunned. And that way, all that energy that you've tied up in aversion or fear or shame can be reintegrated. So our practice has to be deep enough to contain, embrace, and transform suffering. And happiness has to be based on a resilience, a deeper practice of insight and compassion, of deep looking, deep listening, as any real relationship also needs to be based on, seeing each other for who we really are. And even though, our qualities are changeable, there's nothing ultimate, in terms of she's an angry woman, he's an aggressive man, whatever. These things are impermanent, but they're also part of who we are relatively. Yeah. And sometimes we can't, it's good to know, there's that prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So sometimes we can change things, and sometimes people are suffering for stupid reasons. And also you can't fix everything with meditation or peace of mind. Like, a black man, however much he meditates, however enlightened he is, can still go out onto the street and be shot by police for something he didn't do because of racism, because of racial profiling. A woman, no matter how much metta she has, may still be raped and murdered, because patriarchy believes women's bodies owe men something, right? So those problems need to be solved. They're systemic problems and they need to be solved communally. But at the same time, being part of samsara, being part of life, we can still manage our reaction, which is pretty important for well-being, because there are just things, shit happens. There are things that happen that we can't control. And sometimes we have to learn, when we have to let go, when we can no longer change that situation. People are sometimes driven by ignorance, and we can let them pull us down, or we can look with insight and compassion. Sometimes people will behave in ways that are unbecoming of people on the spiritual path. People don't join spiritual communities because they're enlightened. They join them because they're suffering. That was some great advice my teacher gave to me when I first became a nun. He's like, don't expect these people to be nice to you or to help you. Don't expect too much from them at all, because they're messed up and they're here because they're suffering. And there's some good stories from the life of the Buddha to remind us of how people can be unskillful. Like, there were a few Brahmins who were jealous of the Buddha. So to sully his good name, they paid this woman to pretend to be pregnant. And so first of all, she dressed up in some really nice clothes, and she just was heard saying very loudly, I spent some very special, intimate time with the Buddha. It was just so wonderful to be in his presence. It was so wonderful. And then, a few months later, she came back and she had a pregnant belly, and she was just saying to everyone, I think the Buddha had given a Dharma talk, and he said, does anyone have any questions? And the pregnant woman stood up and said something like, everyone receives the fruit of their actions, sir. Is it, Venerable Sir, is it not so that you've said this? And here I stand with the fruit of your actions. When are you going to take responsibility? And the Buddha smiled, and he said to the woman, yes, dear sister, I too acknowledge everybody does receive the fruits of their actions, and you too will also receive the fruits of your actions very soon. and she put her hands on her hips and was like, what do you mean? And she actually had a piece of wood under her dress, and it was a very heavy, big piece of wood, and it fell out, and because she stood up with indignance and moved her hands back, and the piece of wood fell on her foot, and she was like, oh. But unfortunately for us, people who accuse us of things we may not have done, or who make us suffer for stupid reasons, don't always have that instant moment of. And there was another time where uh, some rival gurus were a bit jealous of the Buddha, and they murdered a dancing girl and buried her body in the grounds of the monastery. And it so happened that it was a very shallow grave, and some rain came and that washed away a bit of the soil, and they found the public came across her body there in a shallow grave. And there was this rumor. The rumor was started by the people that murdered this woman. The Buddha has sex workers come and entertain the monks, and the whole community is corrupt, and the monks had to go out in town and ask for food from these lay people who thought that they'd been carrying on with dancing girls and breaking their vows and living in a lascivious lifestyle. And they were shamed, and the monks were like, we can't bear this. It's horrible to be looked at with suspicion and to be kind of viewed as dishonorable people. And the Buddha said, you must bear it, because the world is full of deluded people, and we need to understand, that's their process, and we can't always change that. We have to be patient with that, and to practice, with equanimity, for the day will come when they will be revealed for what they are, or the day will come when they realize that they were unskillful in that. But it may take a long time, and the wheels of samsara turn, and the wheels of samsara are driven by delusion. So you can't always change everything. And, you know what you've done, how you're practicing, and their opinion can't change you. You know that you're on the right path. So you have to have some fortitude. And sure enough, one of the Buddha's followers hired some detectives who worked out, who'd done it, and they were convicted. And the Buddha was vindicated. And then everybody was like, we're so sorry, and more offerings and so forth. And one time, the Buddha's son Rahula, they were out on alms round, and Rahula was like feeling a bit proud, and wondering about the past lives of the Buddha, and thinking, I'm his son, and isn't that great? And the Buddha said to Rahula, because the Buddha could read minds, he was like, Rahula, you're distracted. You're not worthy of alms food today, and you're just not really getting the fruits of being a monk. So I suggest you just go back and meditate more, and don't come out on alms round with us today until you're more mindful. And Rahula felt so ashamed that his father had addressed him in front of all the monks in this way. And he just wanted to hide away from the Buddha and the community, because he felt he'd been, shamed, but he felt that burning shame. And he didn't come to the teachings for many days, and he tried to avoid his father. And finally the Buddha came to see Rahula, and he said, son, I'm sorry, maybe you feel ashamed that I rebuked you in front of others, but it's important that we all honestly practice from our heart, and not have any special treatment. And Rahula, have equanimity, because I didn't have any ill will when I said that in front of others. Rahula, be like water. Water receives offerings both fair and foul with equanimity and just keeps on flowing. Rahula, be like fire. Fire receives the sacred offerings of Brahmins and the burning garbage and burns them both equally. Rahul, be like the air, the breeze. The breeze carries the smell of fair and foul things with pure equanimity and just carries on. So be like the elements, Rahul. Receive good and bad of life with equanimity and carry on, and don't allow it to destroy your peace of mind. Yeah. So in this way, this process of going deeper in our practice, our practice will stay with us through good and bad. It won't fall by the wayside, and it will be a source of nourishment, and it will ensure that we're living our best life with so much integrity. And, you know, it will be like the warrior who never leaves his duty, you know, or yeah, it will be our companion through thick and thin, and ensure that we carry wisdom and make the most of each precious moment of life left to us. Because you realize as you get older, like, it can go like this, you know. So live each moment of your life with awareness, because this is a day that won't come again. And it is better with Dharma. It is better with awareness. Not just to be happy, which is not a bad goal in the beginning, but ultimately we can only be happy when we work through our issues and we work through the accumulated debris, not just of this life, but so many lifetimes, into our true home, into our true inheritance, which is just pure awakened mind. You know, everybody has Buddha nature. So if you want true happiness, you know, why not cultivate that? Because that is the ultimate refuge. And even if you're not completely sure, you know, that this pure unarisen state, you know, exists beyond relative conditions, generally the process of meditation is an interesting one, and generally does reveal things, and does generally make life better, make the burdens we carry lighter, you know. It is a deep practice to live in the present and to do things in such a way that every moment is sacred. You know, like if you eat as if you're a person who doesn't have troubles, drink tea as if that's all you have to do. That is the best and most sacred thing you'll ever do. In that moment, you're seeing the cloud in your tea. You're seeing the springs of the earth in your tea. You're seeing the woman in a beautiful colored sari in Bengal who picked the tea. That moment is a connection, a sacred coming together of all of heaven and earth. And we have this tendency to want to run away from suffering. We spend our whole lives running, but we're missing life. Every moment we're running, every moment we're distracted, we're missing the beauty of the present moment. And sometimes the present moment is painful, you know, but if you cut out the suffering, you also cut out the beauty. If you are disassociated, you can't feel joy. So to feel joy, you also have to feel heartbreak. Without the compost, there can't be the roses, right? So real joy, real happiness, real lightness of heart also has to come from, you know, the darkness, facing the darkness and allowing it to break down, to move through it. So as much as we have suffering, we also have the capacity to transform it and to move through it and to come out the other side. Yeah. And if we really are able to, and sometimes suffering is too much, you know, and we just need to disassociate for a while, and that's a self-preserving mechanism. You know, we need to feel safe, or we just need to come back to our breath, or go for a walk, or, you know, do something, and that's okay. We're not always ready to every day, every moment, but we definitely have to have those moments where we work through the compost, where we turn the compost and allow it to break down. And when we have gone through some darkness, our capacity to hold space for others and to have genuine, transformative, powerful compassion, so that we become a light in the world. And when we're not just practicing for ourselves, but we're practicing to free ourselves and others from suffering and to hold space. Because we were talking about how, sensitive people don't get burnout, how they don't get compassion fatigue. And that compassionate resilience where you are that burning heart, that heart that is on fire to share joy, to show others their own goodness, to be a reflection for what is good in the world, to be a light in a dark place. That heart of bodhicitta gives us the strength to carry on in the darkest places sometimes. But, it's not a bad thing to know your own limits and engage in self-care. Yeah. But as we bear witness to our own suffering and build resilience, our capacity to hold space for others also increases, and we become less judgmental, less afraid of others, suffering. Like in the beginning, when you come to a Dharma center, you're probably very focused on your own peace and don't want to disturb that. And then as you get older, and more mature in your practice, you have more of a sense of humor. You're less rigid, less judgmental, more able to be dynamic, respond in the moment with dynamism in different ways to benefit different people. And that neuroplasticity, that spontaneous joy, that resilience and strength, and that ability to hold space for chaos and, the vast, infinite varieties of sentient beings that exist and their needs and capacities and understanding. The ability to deal with that is in part beginner's mind, the joy of practice and curiosity, and in part the maturity of bodhicitta, the mind of compassion that wishes to free all beings from suffering. So there's that young child heart, that beginner's mind, that curiosity, that openness, but there's also that maturity, that groundedness of bodhicitta. Because one without the other, the curious, open, vivid mind without the groundedness and maturity of compassion, one without the other can get you into trouble. So you need both, beginner's mind and the maturity and resilience of bodhicitta. And in this way, our happiness is deep and not, and it contains the darkness as well as the light. And, and in the process, the process isn't always that you have good days all the time. So in the meantime, have a sense of humor and don't be too sanctimonious, because we're all, it's a long and bumpy ride home, so we can't be too tight. If you think of it as like a really bad cart with a really old donkey pulling it, who's stubborn and sometimes likes to just walk off the path and eat grass, and you're like sitting there, come on, when are we going to get back on the path? And so if you sit rigidly while the cart's bumping up and down, you're really going to have an aching body by the end of the day. So you have to be a little more relaxed and just accept, this is life and life is imperfect, and there's an old donkey pulling my cart who's very stubborn. Yeah. Do you have any other questions or?
No question, but it's certainly true. The essence of practice is to ability to stay with the suffering. That's very much our organism has evolved to do the opposite, to push it away and, feel better and so on. But staying with that low feeling, it's very critical. I do appreciate what you say. And also having a connection to the sense of absolute, the bodhicitta, that, this sense of I in others and so on, perhaps not the way I think reality is. Reality is the deepest sense, it's just a oneness. There is nothing needs to be fixed, improved. But yeah, no, very, yeah, very deep, very wise. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, there's still the relative world,
Yes.
the relative world that half the world is living on $3.25 a day, and people are killing themselves and fighting wars, and so there is that to attend to.
Yes, you cannot escape into the absolute, but also I think relative can also, you can carry the way all the time with it.
Yes, that's true. You need a bit of both.
Yeah.
You need that ultimate perspective too. That can also regenerate your sense of humor and joy, and not drag you down with the heavy work of confronting suffering. And remember, in the Bodhisattva's way of life, they call it be a child of illusion. So do what you have to do, but do it with the knowledge that this is like a dream, and the people in it are like a dream, and but it's still got consequences as long as we're not, as long as we haven't realized that.